Parliament.
Give the floor to the ambassador, the representative of the Russian Federation, Vladimir.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Ursula Mueller, for her briefing. We highly value the dedicated and brave work of humanitarian workers in Syria and other hotbeds of conflict. We are also deeply grateful to Nujeen Mustafa for telling firsthand her own tale, a story that is at once tragic and heroic, and one that pushes us to redouble our efforts in searching for a settlement to the Syrian crisis. We note that the situation in Syria has stabilized significantly. True breakthroughs have been made in combating terrorism. The level of violence has decreased, particularly in areas controlled by the legitimate government. Nonetheless, the situation in the country remains complex, and more than ever, the coordinated assistance of the international community is required in order to consolidate the gains that have been achieved and create the necessary conditions for a further normalization of the situation. Further significant progress is real, can be made. However, in order to do this, we must renounce any attempts to politicize the humanitarian dossier, as well as double standards in assessing the events in the Syrian Arab Republic. It is time to revise long outdated approaches that have now been overcome by the development of events in Syria. We must put an end to persistent attempts to blame Damascus for everything and thus hold back the process of normalizing the situation in Syria and around it, including through the reintegration of Syria into the Arab family. Joint efforts to strengthen peace and stability in the country could be further facilitated by putting a swift end to the unlawful occupation of a number of areas in Syria, including in the northeast of Syria and the Al-Tanf region, as well as truly joining our efforts in combating the ongoing terrorist threat, which, and this is particularly alarming, is beginning to spill out far beyond the borders of the region. We once again draw attention to the harmfulness and defectiveness of unilateral sanctions. They only exacerbate the humanitarian situation in Syria and other states. They harm the civilian population. They undermine the normal functioning of Syrian medical and social services. And they also hinder supply of vitally necessary fuel to the population. We call on everyone to join the efforts to restore the ruined infrastructure in the country, as well as the return of areas that have been stabilized to normal life. The government of Syria, with the assistance of Russia and other partners, is making active efforts towards this. Homes are being built, civilian infrastructure is being repaired, as well as hospitals and roads. Since July 2018, on the territory of Syria, nearly 900 educational and 200 medical facilities and establishments have been repaired, as well as a number of road bridges and thousands of kilometers of roads. Thousands of kilometers of power lines have been laid. Approximately 140 water supplies facilities have been made operational, as well as 180 bakeries, 631 electrical substations, more than 14,000 industrial facilities. Many thousands of hectares have been cleared of mines. We welcome the intensification of economic relations between Syria and its Arab neighbors. Restoring relationships that were destroyed by conflict is a natural and an objective process, and a policy of good neighborliness is a key to strengthening security and stability in the entire region. Despite objective challenges, the process of Syrian refugees' return maintains its positive momentum. Daily, approximately 1,000 persons return to Syria. Since July 2018, more than 190,000 Syrian nationals have returned to their home country. We're also seeing positive developments in terms of IDPs' returns to their original homes. Syrian authorities are working actively to improve the effectiveness of the repatriation process, and they are providing the necessary guarantees for this. In 413 settlements that least suffered from military activities, centers have been opened to receive and house more than 1.5 million refugees. Syria's Coordination Committee for the Return of Refugees is carrying out various socioeconomic activities. Against that context, in areas not under Damascus's control, we are seeing a completely different trend, the opposite trend, a negative one. We share concerns over the dire humanitarian situation in the temporary housing area of Al-Hal, which, despite the efforts of international humanitarian organizations, continues to rapidly deteriorate. The camp, which was designed for 40,000 people, is now overcrowded with nearly twice that many people. Persons are living in insufferable conditions, and many of them, and as we've heard today, most of them are women and children, have suffered through traumatic ordeals. Just recently, they were under the control of terrorists and were forced to flee from not very precisely targeted air and ground strikes during the counter-terrorist operations in Hajin and the Al-Baghouz pocket. We believe there is a need to continue coordinating work to resettle the IDPs in the Rukban camp. Only in that way can the problem be solved, especially given that almost everyone in the camp has expressed the desire to leave the Al-Tanf area. Since February of this year, some 7,000 persons were transferred from the camp to territory under the government's control, and this in accordance with their own desires. If this pace keeps up, then within half a month, up to 60 or 70% of the camp's residents would be able to leave. Syrian authorities are providing guarantees of decent living conditions for citizens who return from Rukban. All those who have left the camp have been provided with medical assistance, as well as basic necessities and food. The questions of restoring documents and providing employment are also being quickly resolved. And it is unacceptable to gloss over these steps and to ignore positive aspects. However, the situation in Rukban remains difficult. The militants of the illegal armed group Magawir al-Traora, who control the camp, subject its inhabitants to violence daily. They are blocking the process of their return and even attempting to dictate their own agenda. We believe that if the U.S. were to join the joint coordination meetings organized on the initiative of the Russian Federation, which are held between Russia, representatives of Russia, Syria, and various UN agencies on the Rukban issue, this would contribute to a speedy settlement of the problem of that IDP camp. Such joint work could become a real, tangible contribution to normalizing the living conditions of the civilian population, including those with disabilities. The situation in Idlib continues to remain unstable. The former al-Nusra militants, who have now been reincarnated as the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham entity, continue to attack government positions. They strike indiscriminately, and this includes strikes on civilian infrastructure. Innocent civilians are dying. The pseudo-humanitarian personnel of the White Helmets continues to prepare ever new provocations in order to accuse the lawful authorities of using toxic agents. We see what is going on. And we don't know how long the status quo in Idlib can remain as is. It is absolutely unviable, and it is dangerous for the security of Syria and the region. We are continuing to work with our Turkish partners in order to develop a lasting solution to this problem. And a detailed discussion of our steps with regards to the Syrian situation is taking place during ongoing Russian-Turkish consultations. Mr. President, in order to make the positive developments in Syria even more sustainable, work must continue, consolidated work on the political track in support of the efforts of the Special Envoy, Mr. Peterson. And this is particularly relevant in the area of launching the Constitutional Committee. The Astana Troika is doing just that. On April 25-26 in Nur Sultan, the 12th International Meeting on Syria will take place. And Kazakhstan's leadership is providing organizational and other assistance for this event. We believe that this will make another tangible contribution to the Syrian settlement process. And we note that this meeting was preceded by intensive work. Russian representatives held a series of consultations with all key stakeholders, primarily the Syrian government as well as the Syrian opposition. It is important that on the margins of that event, the 8th meeting of the working group on liberating the detainees, abductees, handover of bodies, and search for missing persons. We note that thanks to the efforts of that group, an exchange of prisoners took place between the Syrian government and illegal armed groups in the Al-Bab region. We once again call on all colleagues to act in the interest of Syrians and not in order to implement geopolitical projects that have already destabilized a number of countries in the Middle East and North Africa and led to the destruction of statehood. Together, we can put an end to destructive trends in Syria and the region as a whole. We are prepared to cooperate and open to serious and feasible, practically feasible initiatives. The realities of the region make it necessary for all of us to come together and join efforts. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.